Hello and welcome to Mummification. So we are going to talk through why Egyptians mummified and how they mummified. So this is the very short version. If you're interested in this, of course, there's tons of information out there. I don't really want you to Google this topic because you'll get all kinds of wacky stuff. But if you're interested, I certainly have a lot more detail. Like for example, the activity that we're going to do today shrinks down the mummification process into 6 steps, which is very brief. If you want to know more about that, I have something I can send you that has close to 20 steps of mummification, so it gives you a whole lot more detail, and I have other detailed articles as well if you're interested, just for fun. But for the sake of our lesson and everybody having sort of a baseline idea of how mummification was done and why it was so important, we're going to do today's assignment. So the first thing I have pulled up is, hopefully you have printed this already. There's a link to this PDF, so you don't have to try to get it from this video, but this is page 1 and this is page 2. So we're going to need you to have those either printed or you can write out the answers as I go through them. But that's the document that we're going to be writing on, or in your notebook on notebook paper if you don't have a printer. And then this is the article we're going to get the answers from. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading this article, and then I'm going to pause if there is something that we need to put down for an answer. So I'm going to read through the whole first page actually before I pause so that you can get the mummification process, and then we'll go back and fill out those steps in order on the paper. So ancient Egypt mummification. In ancient Egyptian culture, the afterlife was important. One way they prepared for the afterlife was to try and prepare the body as long as possible through a process known as embalming. These embalmed bodies were called mummies. The process. Egyptians performed an elaborate process to preserve the body to keep it from decaying. The main goal was to get all the water and moisture out of the body, since that's what caused the most decay. 4 priests, one dressed as Anubis, began covering the body in a salty substance known as natron to dry the body out. Some of the organs were taken out. The heart was left in the body since it was considered the center of intelligence. The brain was thrown away because it was thought to be useless. Organs were placed in canopic jars, which are just jars that have the heads of gods as the lid. Bodies were covered and stuffed with natron and linen cloth to replace the organs. The body dried out for around 40 days. Once dry, lotions were used to preserve the skin, and the body was reinforced with packing. So it's kind of to puff it back up since all the organs are out. And remember that this was done to keep it super dry. So anything that had liquid had to go. So that, of course, meant the organs. Nostrils were stuffed with wax and pads were placed under the eyes. Makeup was applied and jewelry was used to decorate the body. The first strips of linen were wound around the entire body. Resin, which kind of looks like honey, glued the layers of wrap together. Good luck charms, such as Ankh, a symbol of life, was tucked in the layers of linen. The face was covered with a mask, so the Ba and Ka, which are the souls, could recognize the body. Once it was wrapped up, it was covered in a shroud, which is like a blanket, and placed in a stone coffin known as a sarcophagus. So if we pause there and we go back to our sheet, we've just heard all of the steps. So if you look back in the text, we know that if we look at these choices, so we have the body is wrapped in linen strips and glued. That can't be first because that's at the end. The body is covered in natron, a salty substance. The body dries out for 40 days. Bodies are stuffed with natron and linen. The body is placed in a sarcophagus, and the organs are placed in canopic jars. So the first thing that I heard was this one. So you'd want to put a 1 here, where it says the body is covered in natron, a salty substance. So you want to put a 1 in that circle. The next thing I read was the organs are placed in canopic jars. So I would put a 2 here. Bodies are stuffed with natron and linen. That's where I'm going to put my 3. Right? So we have so far a little bit of drying. I know that one could also go first, or sounds like it could go second, but in the article this came first. So 1. Then the organs are placed in jars. The body is stuffed with natron and linen. Now we're on step 4, which is this one. The body dries out for around 40 days. So I put a 4 here. And then this is number 5. The body is wrapped in linen strips and glued. And the last one is this one, number 6. The body is placed in a sarcophagus. So that's where we'd put a 6 in that circle. So if you didn't print this, if you're writing it out, just make sure you keep pausing me and you can rewind me so that you have time to write out each of these statements in the order that I just went through. So now I'm going to go back to the article so we can get the answer to these multiple choice questions, which again, if you're writing on your paper, you'll just write these out with their answers. So now we are on to burial. So the body has been prepared. If you look back up here just for your knowledge, we know that the entire process from the time the person passes away to the time they are actually put into their tomb is 70 days, but they say 40 in this number here because this is just the drying out process. So of those 70 days, 40 of them are nobody doing any work. It's just the body laying in that natron, powdery, salty stuff so that the drying out process can be complete. So the workers are really only doing work on the person for the other 30 days for a total of 70. So burial. So now the mummy is totally wrapped and ready. It's in the coffin and it's ready to go to its final resting place. A procession by family and friends took the sarcophagus, which is that big coffin. It might have other coffins inside of it, and eventually the body is in the smallest one, to its final resting place. Mourners wailed while priests prayed at the door of the tomb. The tomb door was locked and sealed, and the gods performed the weighing of the heart ceremony, hidden from humans, to determine if the mummy's heart was light. If it passed the test, then the soul boarded Ra's heavenly boat to sail away to join Osiris in the shining land of the two fields for eternity. So this is all just people believed that's what was happening. This is where, religious belief versus what's actually happening just depends on the believer. So the Egyptians believed that's what was happening and that the soul was going to get on this boat. Obviously, that's not something that you would be able to see because it's something that they just believed happened. Who was mummified? The very rich were the only ones who could afford the best embalming. However, the process was important to everyone, so they got the best they could for their money, and most Egyptians were mummified. I don't know if I would say most Egyptians were mummified. When we looked at that social class pyramid earlier in the week, there were a lot of people at the bottom. There were a lot of people in the peasant and the slave class, and they wouldn't have been able to afford any of this. So more likely, I would say some Egyptians were mummified. We don't know exactly how many because, of course, if the bodies weren't perfectly preserved, then they didn't survive. Poor Egyptians were buried in the sand, and by survive, I mean their body intact inside bones. Poor Egyptians were buried in the sand, so that's where I think a lot of people ended up burying their loved one because that was free, while rich ones were buried in tombs. An estimated 70 million mummies were made in Egypt over the 3,000 years of the civilization. So definitely a lot, and those would be varying levels of quality depending on how much money you had. If you got that full process I was just describing above, or if you got sort of a shorter version of that. So on the multiple choice, number 7, it says, what is the main reason bodies were mummified in ancient Egypt? So I'm back here, I'm right here. And if we look at the choices, the article tells us that it's B, to prepare the body for the afterlife. Egyptian kings, I'm on pyramids now, pharaohs in the Old and Middle Kingdoms were buried in pyramids. About 50 royal pyramids have survived, built on the desert edge west of the ancient capital of Memphis. Egyptians believed if their pharaoh was mummified, they would live forever. Pyramids were designed to protect the pharaoh and his belongings. So they wanted to get this taken care of and make it work and make it right so that they believed their pharaoh would live forever, and they wanted him to live or her to live forever because they were believed to be a god. Okay, number 8 on the multiple choice, if we go back here, this has to do with mummies again, so we're going to go back to our mummy part. Why were the faces of mummies covered? So back here, it talks about the face was covered with a mask so the Ba and Ka could recognize the body. And remember, those are the souls. So we want to pick C for number 8. Number 9, why was natron mainly used during mummification? And that is to D, dry out the body. Number 10, I know this sounds gross. What is the main reason brains of dead Egyptians were thrown away? And the answer is D, they were now useless. So the Egyptians believed that the heart actually is where all of the memories were. It says right here, the heart was left in the body since it was considered the center of intelligence. So there was no real understanding about the brain being the center of everything, as opposed to the heart being just not part of your emotional or your memory or anything like that. Okay, Number 11, around how many Egyptian mummies were created during the 3,000 years of the civilization's existence? And we know that that is a big number, around 70 million mummies. So the last paragraph is just so you know moving forward, how do we know all this stuff and how do we investigate a mummy without damaging it? There are still some mummies of ancient pharaohs around. Tutankhamun and Ramses the Great were preserved and can be viewed at museums. However, over the past few thousand years, several Egyptian mummies have been destroyed. Some were burned for fuel, ground into powder to make magical potions, or destroyed by treasure hunters. And this would be sometimes accidental if the treasure hunters or robbers were going in just to get the jewelry, they might just unwrap the body, take the jewelry because there would be jewelry stuffed in the layers of linen often. And then if once the body is unwrapped and just laying out, then it's going to decay. It's going to, the skin is, everything's going to go away and you're just going to be left with bones, which is not what the Egyptians wanted. Scientists can study mummies without unwrapping them using CAT scans and X-ray machines. So if a tomb is discovered by a team of trained archaeologists and historians, then you can have it done correctly. Like Discovery Channel would pay for an excavation, or National Geographic, or the Egyptian government. Those Egyptian mummies would then be preserved and cared for and not just unwrapped. But unfortunately, if someone else finds it, then it might be damaged. So that should be all you need for today. This information is exactly what you need for the puzzle piece, so you can go ahead and do that with your notes in front of you. Have a great day.